The chandelier light caught the diamond at her throat before it caught anything else in the room, and that was the first mistake. Vivian Marsh had learned a long time ago that light like that made you visible, and visible was the one thing she had spent 12 years trying not to be. But the invitation had specified formal, and formal in this city meant the Ashcroft Ballroom on the 62nd floor, all marble and gold leaf and men who measured each other's worth by the cut of a lapel. She adjusted the strap of her red dress, sleeveless, the fabric cut close through the waist, and told herself this was just another client dinner. Just another night of nodding at men who talked too much about their portfolios. She was 32 years old and she had built a life out of careful, deliberate choices. An apartment in a building with a doorman who knew her name. A job at a mid-sized asset management firm where she reviewed risk exposure for clients who thought risk was something that happened to other people. A routine so tightly stitched that nothing in it left room for surprise. That was the point. Surprise had cost her everything once, and she did not intend to pay that price twice. The ballroom smelled of hothouse lilies and old money, and the string quartet in the corner played something classical and forgettable while waiters in white gloves circled with trays of champagne that cost more per glass than most people made in an hour. She had come alone, as she always did to these things now, comfortable in the particular solitude of being surrounded by 200 strangers who wanted nothing from her but a signature on a contract. She had learned to like it that way. Solitude did not disappear on you without warning. Solitude did not leave a hole in your life the exact shape of a man's hands. She was 3 steps into the ballroom, champagne flute already sweating in her hand, when she saw him. He was standing near the far window with his back partly turned, and for a full 2 seconds her mind refused to process what her eyes were telling it. The line of his shoulders under the black suit. The particular stillness of him. The way he did not shift his weight from foot to foot the way other men did when they were bored at a party. She had spent 12 years training herself out of looking for that stillness in every crowded room she walked into, and she had thought, mostly, that she had succeeded. Then he turned his head, and it was him. Dante Moretti. Older, the lines at the corners of his eyes cut a little deeper. But it was him, and the champagne flute slipped an inch in her fingers before she caught it. Her stomach dropped the way it did on the first plunge of a roller coaster, except there was no safety bar here, no track laid out ahead of her. Just 12 years of silence standing 8 feet away in a $3,000 suit, looking at her like he had been waiting for her to walk through that door. She had buried him. Not literally. There had been no funeral because there had been no body, no note, no phone call. One night he had kissed her forehead at her apartment door and told her he had a meeting, and then he had simply not come back. Not that night. Not the next. Not ever. She had called every number she had for him until they were all disconnected. She had gone to the restaurant he owned, the one that was a front for something she had never let herself ask too many questions about, and found it shuttered with a for lease sign in the window. She had spent 2 months waiting for a phone call that never came, and then she had done the only thing that made sense to a 20-year-old with nothing left to hold on to. She had packed a bag and moved across the country and rebuilt herself from nothing, brick by brick. Until Dante Moretti was a name, she did not let herself think in daylight. But he was here now, and the room was full of people who had no idea that the ground under her feet had just opened. She should turn around. She should walk back through those doors and take the elevator down 62 floors and never think about this ballroom again. That was the sane thing to do, the thing the woman she had built herself into over 12 years would do without hesitation. Instead, her feet carried her 3 steps closer, because some part of her that she thought she had killed a long time ago simply would not let her walk away without knowing why. He watched her cross the room the way a man watches weather approaching, aware of its power and unable to look away from it. Up close the years showed more clearly. A scar along his jaw that had not been there before, thin and pale, the kind that came from a blade rather than an accident. His eyes were the same though, dark, steady, and fixed entirely on her, like there was no one else standing in a room that held at least 200 people. Vivian. He said her name the way he had always said it, like it was the only word in any language worth the effort of his mouth. Not Viv, the way her friends called her now. Not Ms. Marsh, the way clients addressed her. Vivian, with the weight he had always given it, and hearing it after 12 years felt like being struck. "You have some nerve," she said. and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Standing there like you have any right to say my name. I have every right." His voice was low, pitched for her ears alone in a room full of noise. "More right than anyone else in this building. You disappeared." The words came out sharper than she intended, sharper than she had let herself feel about it in years, because feeling had a cost and she had stopped paying it a long time ago. 12 years, Dante. Not a call. Not a letter. "I thought you were dead." Something moved behind his eyes, quick and dark, gone almost before she registered it. "I know what you thought." "You know." She almost laughed, and there was no humor in the sound at all. "You know what I thought and you let me think it. For 12 years. There is a version of this conversation," he said, "that we cannot have standing in the middle of this room. Then there isn't a version of this conversation at all, because I am not going anywhere with you." But even as she said it, she was aware of how close he stood, close enough that she could smell the cedar and tobacco note of the cologne he had always worn, the same scent that had lived in the collar of the shirts he used to leave folded over her desk chair. 12 years, and the smell of him still did something to the base of her spine that had nothing to do with her mind's carefully constructed defenses. A man in a dark suit appeared at Dante's shoulder, murmured something too low for her to catch, and Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He held up one finger, a small, economical gesture, and the man withdrew as if he had been dismissed by a king. 5 minutes, Dante said, turning back to her. "Give me 5 minutes, and then if you want to walk away, I will not stop you. You didn't stop yourself from walking away 12 years ago. Why would you stop me now?" The words landed harder than she meant them to, and for a moment something raw crossed his expression before he shuttered it, quick and practiced, the way a man does who has spent a lifetime deciding exactly what other people are allowed to see. "Because 12 years ago I did not have a choice. Tonight I do. 5 minutes, Vivian. That is all I am asking." She should have said no. Every rational part of the life she had built told her to say no, to turn on her heel and walk back through the gilded doors and let the elevator carry her down into a night where Dante Moretti did not exist. But there had always been a gap between what was rational where he was concerned and what her body actually did, and that gap had not closed in 12 years no matter how hard she had tried to force it shut. 5 minutes, she said. Not 1 second more. He led her toward a private alcove near the terrace doors, one hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching her, and even that careful restraint felt like it cost him something. The noise of the ballroom fell away behind heavy curtains, replaced by the hum of the city 62 floors below and the low murmur of wind against glass. "Talk," she said, arms crossed over her chest like a wall she was building in real time. "The night I left," he said, "I was not called to a meeting. I was taken." The word landed strangely in the quiet alcove. Taken. Not a word she had ever let herself consider in 12 years of imagining explanations, each one worse or more mundane than the last. She had pictured him leaving her for someone else. She had pictured him deciding the life he lived was too dangerous to drag her through and choosing silence as a kind of mercy. She had never once let herself picture the alternative, because the alternative meant something had been done to him that he had not chosen, and that felt like a door she was not ready to open even now. Taken by who? The Calabrese family. He said it flatly, a fact stated rather than a story told for sympathy. There was a dispute over territory my father had held for 30 years. They wanted to send a message that no one, not even the Morettis, was untouchable. I was the message they chose to send. Her arms tightened across her chest, less a wall now and more a way to hold herself together. You were held for 12 years? Not the whole time. His jaw worked once, a muscle flexing beneath the pale line of the scar. The first 2 years I was kept in a house outside Palermo, a room with one window bricked halfway shut, so I could never see enough of the sky to know what season it was. They wanted to break something in me before they decided what use I would be. When breaking did not work the way they hoped, they decided to use me instead. There were men who needed things done that could not be traced to the Calabrese name directly. I became one of the ways they did that. Every year I stayed alive was a year I stayed useful to them, and every year I stayed useful to them was a year I could not risk a single word reaching you. You could have sent word. A message. Anything. Anyone I trusted with a message to you, he said, and his voice dropped lower, rougher. Would have led them straight to your door. I watched 2 men die for less than a phone call to a woman they suspected I loved. One of them was a courier who smuggled a single letter to my mother. 3 lines, nothing more, telling her I was alive. They found out. They killed him in front of me to make sure I understood the cost of that kind of mercy. I was not going to make you the third. The word love, spoken so plainly and without ceremony, landed somewhere under her ribs and stayed there. She had not expected him to say it at all. Not after 12 years. Not standing in a curtained alcove with a party humming on the other side of the fabric. And now, she asked, you just walk back into a ballroom in a suit that costs more than my car and expect 12 years to disappear because you say the word taken?
No.
His eyes did not leave hers. I do not expect anything to disappear. I expect you to hate me. I expect you to walk away from me tonight and never answer if I call. I came anyway because I needed you to know the truth before you spent the rest of your life believing I chose to leave you. That is the only thing I came here for. Something in his voice, some deep and unfamiliar note of exhaustion, made her look at him more closely than she had allowed herself to since she first saw him across the room. There was gray now at his temples that had not been there before. The scar along his jaw. A tension in his shoulders that read less like arrogance and more like a man who had spent years learning to survive rooms he could not leave. How did you get out? She asked, quieter now. My father never stopped looking. 6 months ago, a shift in the commission gave him the leverage he needed to force a trade. I will not pretend the details are clean. Nothing about that world is clean. But I walked out of a warehouse outside Naples in March, and I spent the months since relearning how to exist in a life I thought I had lost the right to have. Why wait until tonight to find me? Because I did not know if you would want to be found. For the first time all night, something uncertain crossed his face, something that looked almost like fear. I did not know if 12 years had turned whatever we had into something you were relieved to be free of. I told myself I would come to New York. I would see you once from a distance, and if you looked happy, if you looked like a woman who had built a life that did not have room for a ghost in it, I would leave you alone and let you keep it. And if I did not look happy, then I was going to find a way to be in this room tonight regardless of the risk, because I could not spend 1 more year of my life without at least trying. Before he could say more, the curtain at the edge of the alcove stirred, and the man who had spoken to him earlier reappeared, his face carrying the particular tightness of someone bringing bad news to a man who did not tolerate bad news gracefully. Boss. The word was quiet, urgent. We have a problem. Sabatini's people are here. Dante's whole posture changed in the space of a single breath. The exhaustion she had glimpsed a moment ago folding itself away behind something colder and more controlled. Where? East entrance. 3 of them, maybe more outside. Vivian. Dante's hand closed around her wrist. Not hard, but with an unmistakable finality. You need to leave this building right now. What is happening? There is no time to explain it fully. This is Marco. He is going to take you down the service elevator. I am not going anywhere with a stranger. Tell me what is happening, Dante. His eyes found hers, and for one unguarded second she saw something close to fear there. Not for himself, she understood immediately, but for her. Sabatini took over what was left of the Calabrese territory after my father broke them apart in the trade. He has wanted me dead for 6 years, since before I was even taken, over a debt my father refused to forgive. If his men know I am in this building, they will assume anyone standing beside me is a target as well. I am not going to let that happen to you twice in one lifetime. The word twice hit her harder than she expected. An admission buried inside a warning. An acknowledgement that whatever had been taken from her 12 years ago had already cost her once, and he was not willing to let it cost her again. Then come with me, she said. Both of us. Right now. I cannot leave a room where my enemies believe they have found me unguarded. If I run, they will read it as weakness, and weakness gets people killed faster than confrontation does. His hand found the side of her face, brief, almost involuntary. His thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that felt like it belonged to a different, gentler version of this same night. Go with Marco. I will find you when this is finished. You said that once before, she said, and her voice cracked despite every effort to keep it steady. You said you would be back, and then you were gone for 12 years. I know. His hand did not move from her face. And I am asking you to trust me one more time, knowing what that trust has already cost you. I would not ask if there were another way. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing 12 years of grief against the plain fact standing in front of her, that whatever else was true, he had come back into a room full of people who wanted him dead specifically to make sure she knew he had never chosen to leave her. That was not the action of a man asking her to disappear quietly a second time. 5 minutes, she said finally. That is what you promised me. You are not allowed to disappear on me again, Dante. Not for 5 minutes, not for 12 years. If you go out there, you come find me when it is finished, or I swear to every saint you Italians pray to, I will burn this entire city down looking for you. For the first time all night, something that was almost a smile touched the corner of his mouth, brief and involuntary and entirely unlike the careful stillness he had worn since she first saw him across the room. That, he said, sounds exactly like the woman I remember. Marco led her through a narrow service corridor behind the kitchens, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly which doors led where and which ones to avoid. Vivian's heels clicked too loudly against the concrete floor, a sound that felt obscene in the tense hush of the corridor, and she found herself straining to hear anything from the ballroom behind them. Raised voices, a struggle, anything that would tell her whether the man she had just found again was walking straight into the kind of danger that had already stolen 12 years of her life once. How do you know Dante? She asked Marco, mostly to keep her mind from spinning into worse places. I have worked for the family since I was 19. Marco did not slow his pace. Mr. Moretti's father pulled me out of a situation I would not have survived otherwise, and when Dante came home in March, I was the first man his father assigned to him. I owe this family more than I can repay in one lifetime, and Dante more than most, because he never once treated me like an obligation. Even after everything he went through, he asks about my mother by name every time he sees me. Is he going to be all right in there? Marco glanced back at her, and something in his expression softened slightly, an acknowledgement that this was not an idle question. Sabatini wants him dead, but he also wants it to look like an accident, or at least like something that cannot be traced back to an open declaration of war. That works in Mr. Moretti's favor tonight. A public ballroom full of witnesses is not where a man like Sabatini makes his move. Not directly. That is not the same as saying he will be fine. No, Marco admitted. It is not. They emerged into an alley behind the building, the night air sharp after the climate-controlled warmth of the ballroom, and Marco guided her toward a black car idling at the curb with its engine already running. But before she reached the door, a second car screeched around the corner of the alley, headlights washing over them both, and Marco's hand shot out to press her flat against the brick wall behind them, his body angling in front of hers. Stay behind me, he said, low and urgent. And for the first time she understood on a visceral level exactly what kind of world she had walked back into the moment she recognized Dante Moretti's shoulders across a crowded ballroom. The car did not stop. It slowed just enough for the passenger window to lower, just enough for Vivian to catch a glimpse of a man's face in the dim light, sharp-featured, unfamiliar, his eyes finding hers for one deliberate second before the window rose again and the car accelerated away down the alley and out of sight. Who was that? Her voice came out steadier than she felt, adrenaline sharpening everything into strange, hyper-real clarity. That, Marco said grimly, was someone making sure they knew exactly what you look like. Her stomach turned cold. Why would they need to know that? Marco did not answer immediately, and his silence told her more than any explanation could have. He opened the car door and gestured her inside with a firmness that did not invite argument. Mr. Moretti will explain when it is safe to. Right now I need to get you somewhere secure. She got into the car because there did not seem to be another reasonable option, her mind still turning over the image of that man's face in the passenger window, deliberate, unhurried, cataloging her the way a predator catalogs something it intends to return for later. 12 years of careful, deliberate, unsurprising life, and in the space of 1 hour it had all come apart at the seams, and she understood with a sinking certainty that there would be no putting it back together the way it had been before. The car took them not to her apartment, as she had assumed it would, but to a townhouse in a quiet, tree-lined street she did not recognize, its windows dark except for a single lit room on the second floor. Marco walked her inside with the same brisk efficiency he had shown in the alley, through a foyer of dark wood and low lighting, and left her in a sitting room with instructions to wait, that Mr. Moretti would come as soon as the situation at the gala was resolved. She did not sit. She paced instead, arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the room, replaying the last hour over and over until the edges blurred. 12 years of grief, rebuilt into something she had convinced herself was closure, and it had taken exactly one glance across a ballroom to prove to her that she had never actually closed anything at all. She had simply packed it into a smaller and smaller box until it stopped taking up visible space, and Dante Moretti had just pried the lid off in the space of a single conversation. It was nearly 2 hours before she heard the front door, and by then she had rehearsed a dozen different versions of what she would say to him, cold, furious, distant, and abandoned every one of them the instant he stepped into the room. There was blood on his knuckles, not his own. She guessed by the way he moved, controlled and unhindered, but the sight of it still made something clench hard in her chest. "Is it over?" she asked. "For tonight." He crossed the room toward her, shrugging out of his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a chair with a care that felt strangely domestic given everything else about the night. "Sabatini's men did not expect me to have this much support inside that building. They retreated before it became a scene the police would need to explain. But this is not finished, Vivian. Enzo Bellini would not have shown himself if this were finished." A man in a car looked at me like he was memorizing my face. Dante's expression went very still. The controlled stillness she remembered from 12 years ago. The one that meant something dangerous was happening behind his eyes even if his face gave nothing away. Describe him. She did, as precisely as she could, and watched a muscle tighten along his jaw with each detail. "That is Enzo Bellini," he said finally. "Sabatini's second. If he saw you clearly enough to describe you to his people, that changes things." "Changes them how?" "It means they will look for a way to use you against me." He said it plainly, without softening it, and she found herself grateful for the honesty even as it settled cold in her stomach. "I am not going to pretend that is not a serious problem, Vivian. I have spent 12 years staying away from you specifically to prevent this exact situation. Tonight I walked back into your life anyway, because I could not stand one more year of you believing I chose to abandon you. I understand now that decision may have cost you your safety. You're saying I'm in danger because you decided to tell me the truth." "I am saying," he said, and for the first time that night his composure cracked visibly, something raw and unguarded showing through, "that I would rather face every gun Sabatini owns than let you spend one more day thinking I stopped loving you the moment I walked out your door 12 years ago. I made my choice tonight with my eyes open. I am not sorry for it, even if it costs me everything a second time." The word love, spoken twice now in one night after 12 years of silence, undid something in her that she had spent over a decade carefully reinforcing. She had built an entire life on the premise that this man had discarded her without explanation, and every part of that foundation had just been proven false in the space of a single evening. It did not erase the years. It did not erase the grief. But it changed the shape of everything she had believed about herself during those years, and that was not a small thing to absorb standing in a stranger's sitting room at 2 in the morning. "I need you to understand something," she said slowly. "I am not the same woman you left 12 years ago. I built a life, a whole life without you in it. I cannot just fold that up and disappear into yours because you showed up at a party and told me the truth. I am not asking you to disappear into anything." His voice was quiet now, stripped of the command it had carried in the alcove. "I am asking for the chance to know the woman you became instead of grieving the girl I left behind. Whatever that looks like. However long that takes." She did not sleep that night, not really. She lay awake in a guest room 2 doors down from wherever Dante had gone, listening to the unfamiliar creak of an unfamiliar house, and by morning she had made a decision that surprised her less than she expected it to. She was not going home. Not yet. 3 days passed before Sabatini made his next move, and when it came exactly where Vivian was least prepared for it. She was leaving her own office building at 6 in the evening, briefcase in hand, mind already on the takeout she planned to order, when a man fell into step beside her on the sidewalk, close enough that she felt the wrongness of it before she consciously registered his face. Enzo Bellini did not touch her. He did not need to. "Ms. Marsh," he said, using her real name in a way that told her exactly how much he already knew about her life. "Walk with me a moment. Nothing needs to happen to you today if you are sensible." Her pulse spiked, but the years of professional composure she had built did not abandon her. "I have nothing to say to you. You do not need to say anything. You only need to listen." His voice was pleasant, almost bored, the voice of a man for whom this kind of conversation was routine. "Tell Dante Moretti that his father's trade did not end the debt his family owes mine. Tell him Mr. Sabatini is a patient man, but patience has a price, and that price just started accumulating interest the moment he decided to walk you into that ballroom. I am not a messenger." "No," Enzo agreed, and something in his tone turned genuinely unsettling. "You are collateral. There is a difference, and I suspect you are about to learn it." He peeled away before she could respond, disappearing into the evening crowd with the same unhurried confidence he had shown in the car window 3 nights earlier, and Vivian stood frozen on the sidewalk for a full 10 seconds before her legs remembered how to move. She did not go home. She went straight to the townhouse, and when she told Dante what had happened, she watched something in him go cold and absolute in a way she had never seen in the man she loved 12 years ago. "He approached you directly." Dante's voice was quiet, and that quiet was worse than shouting would have been. "That was not a threat, Vivian. That was a declaration." "Then let's end it," she said. "Whatever it takes. You do not understand what you are offering to be part of." "I understand exactly what I am offering." She met his eyes without flinching. 12 years ago I did not get a choice in what happened to us. This time I am choosing. I am not going to spend the rest of my life waiting for a man in a car window to decide when my life is worth taking. I would rather stand next to you and finish this than run from it alone. What followed over the next several days was not romance in any way the word usually implied. It was strategy, careful and exhausting, built around a single grand jury date that Dante's lawyers had learned Sabatini was terrified of. A date that would expose financial ties between Sabatini's organization and a shell company neither man wanted examined too closely. Dante's plan was simple in its outline and dangerous in every particular. He would offer Sabatini a private sit-down, one-on-one, no witnesses, an old-world resolution to an old-world debt, and force him to choose between a war that would draw federal attention neither family could survive, or an ending negotiated on Dante's terms. Vivian was not meant to be anywhere near that meeting. She understood the plan, agreed to the plan, and then 2 nights before it was set to happen, discovered through a phone call from Marco's own sister, a hospital records clerk who owed the family a favor, that Enzo Bellini had been treated 3 days earlier for a gunshot wound sustained during an altercation at a warehouse Dante's men were watching. It meant Sabatini's people already knew about the surveillance. It meant the sit-down Dante believed was secret was walking into a trap. She did not call him. She went to the warehouse herself in the 2 hours before the meeting was scheduled, and found Marco outside arguing with 2 other men about access, and used every ounce of professional authority she had built over a decade of walking into rooms full of powerful men who underestimated her to get herself inside before anyone thought to stop her. Dante's face, when he saw her step through that door, went through fear and fury in the space of a single breath. "You should not be here. Neither should you, not like this. It's a trap, Dante. Enzo already knows about the surveillance on this warehouse." Sabatini set the meeting knowing exactly what you would walk into. The silence that followed was the kind that changed the shape of a room, and Vivian watched Dante's entire understanding of the next hour rearrange itself around the information she had just handed him. He looked at her for one long moment, something fierce and grateful and furious all tangled together behind his eyes, and then he moved, fast and decisive, calling Marco in, rerouting the meeting to a location Sabatini's people would not have had time to prepare, buying himself the one advantage he had not had 10 minutes earlier. That advantage was the reason, when Sabatini and Enzo arrived at the warehouse an hour later expecting an ambush of their own making, they found instead a negotiation conducted entirely on Dante Moretti's terms. Backed by federal documentation Dante's lawyers had prepared as leverage, documentation that made clear exactly what would surface publicly if Sabatini did not walk away from this debt permanently. Sabatini was not a stupid man. He recognized, standing in that warehouse with his own trap dismantled around him, that the cost of continuing this war had just become higher than the cost of ending it. He agreed to terms. Enzo's eyes found Vivian once across the warehouse floor, and this time there was no threat in them, only a grudging, professional acknowledgement that she had been the reason his employer's plan had failed. It was over in less time than it had taken her to find her way into that warehouse in the first place, and when Sabatini's car finally pulled away into the dark, Dante crossed the warehouse floor and pulled her against him with a force that told her exactly how afraid he had been, underneath all that careful stillness, of losing her before he had even fully gotten her back. "You could have been killed," he said against her hair. "So could you," she said. "If I had stayed home and waited for you to explain everything to me after the fact. I told you, I am not the woman who waits by the door anymore." He pulled back enough to look at her, and there was something in his expression she had not seen from him even in the years before he disappeared, an openness that looked like a door swinging fully off its careful, guarded hinges. 12 years ago I told myself the kindest thing I could do was disappear and let you build a life that did not have a target painted on it. I was wrong. The kindest thing would have been to trust that you were strong enough to choose your own risks. I am choosing them now, she said. All of them. This life, this danger, you. I am not walking away from any of it. He kissed her then, in a warehouse still smelling faintly of gunmetal and cold concrete, and it did not feel like the ending of anything. It felt like the 12 years of silence had finally, fully closed, replaced by something neither of them had any intention of losing again. Outside, the city moved on unaware of what had nearly happened within its blocks, and inside Vivian Marsh stood in the arms of a man she had once buried in every way but the literal one, and understood that whatever came next, she was not going to face it as someone waiting to be found. She had already done the finding. She intended to keep doing it, for as long as he would let her.